Take on the South is back with its mini-series Southern Seance, in which we ask famous deceased Southerners through OpenAI ChatGPT about their thoughts on the South. To test just how reliable AI and ChatGPT is, we need human expertise, and so for every famous deceased Southerner we interview on Southern Seance, we have a real-life human expert who will judge AI's efforts. We've done Elvis, we've done Lyndon Johnson. Today we turn our attention to one of the South's most influential literary figures, Faulkner. Our living expert to critique and evaluate AI's handling of Faulkner is our own Matt Simmons. In addition to serving as Assistant Director of the Institute for Southern Studies at the University of South Carolina, Matt is also a PhD in English literature and one of the keenest students of Southern literary genres I know. Matt, thanks for doing this today.
American literature.
American literature. Well,
you're the Englishman.
With a heavy hint of Southern.
Yeah.
So let's do this like we've done the others,
all right,
and we'll read it, and then you can rip into it or not, depending on your take. So I asked ChatGPT to write a script for an interview with Mark Smith, host of Take on the South podcast, and author William Faulkner, detailing how and why Faulkner understood himself as Southern, how his upbringing in the South influenced his writing and novels, and examining how else he thought the South impacted his life. And ChatGPT, for the first time, I think that we've done this, spat back a title. And it titled the interview, Southern Echoes, A Conversation with William Faulkner. So I'll be Mark Smith, obviously, and you can be William Faulkner. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Take on the South. I'm your host, Mark Smith. Today we have a literary giant with us, the renowned author William Faulkner. Mr. Faulkner, it's an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate the invitation.
Let's start by delving into your connection with the South. How did you understand yourself as a Southern man, and what aspects of your upbringing shaped that identity?
Well, Mark, I was born in New Albany, Mississippi, and spent much of my life in the South. The landscape, the people, the history, they all became a part of who I am. I felt a deep connection to the traditions and complexities of the region, and believed it seeped into my writing, influencing the way I perceive the world.
Your novels are celebrated for capturing the essence of the South. How did your upbringing in the region influence your writing and the themes in your novels?
The South is a place of contradictions, of beauty and tragedy. My experiences growing up in Mississippi exposed me to the complexities of race, class, and family dynamics. These themes naturally found their way into my novels. The South, with its rich history and intricate social fabric, became a canvas for exploring the human condition in all its facets.
Beyond your writing, how else do you think the South impacted your life? Were there broader cultural or personal influences that shaped your perspective?
The South isn't just a setting, it's a way of life. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I'm sorry.
I get it.
Ain't no way William Cuthbert Faulkner would ever utter such a sentence in his entire daggum life.
I know. Let's get through
Let me continue. The manners, the language, the pace, all of it contributed to the rhythm of my existence. The slow, deliberate pace of the South allowed for a deeper contemplation of life's complexities. It taught me to appreciate nuance, to understand that nothing is ever as simple as it seems. These lessons absorbed from the Southern way of life undoubtedly shaped my worldview.
Mr. Faulkner, thank you for sharing your insights into the profound impact of the South on your identity and work. To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this special episode of Take on the South. Until next time, keep exploring the rich tapestry of the Southern experience. Good night. And that's a good way to finish that. Yeah. All right, Matt. I would say, and then I'm going to let you take it, I would say this is probably the weakest AI response we've had. I don't think that the ones on Elvis or Lyndon Johnson were great, but at least they had something to cotton onto. This one seems really thin. Is that a fair?
Oh no, it's as thin as gruel. I mean, there's nothing here. I mean, I'll say some things about how there's nothing that, other than my laughing at that one egregiously bad sentence and this idea of the pace, and I'll actually show you a example of Faulkner's pacing here in a minute.
Good.
basically what this did, what the machine did, and the machine did what you asked it to do, which is the thing that a lot of people don't understand about generative artificial intelligence, generative AI. The machine doesn't know what you want. The machine only knows what you ask it to do. So you asked the machine to, what did you say? What does it say here? How Faulkner understood himself as a Southerner, how his upbringing in the South influenced his writing his novels. Examine how he thought the South impacted his life. So what someone writing that is reasonably going to think is that the machine, because we've all heard the magic of these things, is going to produce this, if AI is as powerful as we say it is, it's going to produce this wonderfully nuanced thing, right? It's not. Because here's the brass tacks on this. These generative AIs, they need to protect and make efficiencies with computing resources. And it can't go into lots and lots and lots and lots of depth here. One, because you're just using the free version of this, number one. Right. It's not going to prioritize this. Right. What it's doing in this situation is it's saying, okay, who's William Faulkner, what you want to know? And it's basically just looking at the most basic sort of features. And it's getting a few things right. Yes, Faulkner is concerned with the complexities of race, class, and family dynamics. So essentially what it found was this idea of, here's this idea, here's this basic theme of the South, of Faulkner, this basic sort of set of Faulknerian themes. And I'm not going to explore them at all, the machine is thinking, because the machine it's prioritizing its compute resources. And it's saying, okay, so here's what we do. I'm going to give you just this basic level of this, because that's all you've asked for. Now, interestingly, I guarantee you, I've actually used generative AI in my classes before. And when you get a really weak answer like this, you tell the machine it's a bad answer. And then it goes and it gives you a more robust answer. And after 4 or 5 iterations of this, you actually then begin to approach something that is, at least when I've done generative AI in my classes before, and we're looking at like some sort of factual, sort of historical based sort of idea here, produces something not good, but at least something serviceable. I don't know that it could do it with this. Because, one, I don't know what corpus has been fed into it. If Faulkner's corpus has been fed into it, I don't know if it has because of copyright issues and what OpenAI is able to actually purchase here. I've done some work with big data analysis of natural language. And what it can notice certain sort of patterns of certain semantic markers. How many adverbs get used, what sort of what are sort of patterns of speech that show up over and over again, and it can be programmed. It can be taught that certain patterns of speech indicate certain sort of thematic ideas. So maybe it could do that, but I don't know if it's been fed the Faulknerian corpus. And even then, I don't know if it would be able to sort of parse the Faulknerian corpus, because it's the very nature of the Faulknerian corpus is the complexity of the sentence structure and all those kind of things. So that's there. I don't know if it's been fed anything about Faulkner's life. Everything it's saying about the South here, I would say is, what does it say? All these things about my experiences growing up in Mississippi. Is it Faulkner's experiences growing up in Mississippi, or is it Faulkner's being the great-grandson of the old colonel, the grandson of the young colonel, and the son of Murray Faulkner, who's a failure, right? How do those levels of the men behind him lead to this? And how is Faulkner, in some ways, not so much operating in the shadow of the South, qua the South, or Mississippi on the whole? In some ways, he's operating directly in the shadow of the previous 3 generations of men behind him. He's operating under the shadows of women in his life, like his mama and his grandma, like Mammy Caroline Barr, who was the woman who had been enslaved unto his ancestors before the war, and then lived a very long life, and was Faulkner's nursemaid, actually the nursemaid of Faulkner's daughter. She lived until the 1930s, I think. She lived a very, very long life. She's this deep influence on him. So it's this thing where the machine is saying, okay, Faulkner's the great Southern writer. So I'm just going to lean into the basic ideas of the South, these sort of surface level ideas of South that I can quickly find and put them together, because that is what this person has asked me to do. But to say Faulkner is influenced by the South is really missing the point.
Okay.
Faulkner's not really influenced by the South, I would argue. Faulkner is influenced by his own family history, which itself is a story of the South.
And we get nothing of that.
We get nothing of that. We get nothing of that. Now, again, if you tell the generative AI that's a bad, this is a bad response a few times, maybe it does start to get into that. Or maybe we go and rewrite this more, right?
And ask about family.
And we start asking about family.
Right.
Because, again, the machine can only do what you ask it to do.
Right.
The machine can't make those connections. The story of, Faulkner's Southern story that he's telling is a story of his family, or it's a story shaped by his family. The way I talk to my students about Faulkner is that there's these concentric circles. There's when Faulkner's writing, he's writing with a worldview shaped by himself as a man within a family context, which is in a regional context, North Mississippi, which is in a larger context, Mississippi, which is in an even larger context, the South, which is even in a larger context, America, which is even in a larger context, the West, which is even in a larger context, modernity, which is even in a larger context, all of history, which is in a larger context, the sort of realities of all universal human experience. Faulkner is writing from absolute specificity, right? The machine doesn't know you're trying to get to that, which is what I think someone's saying. If William Faulkner is actually sitting across from you, these are the things you would expect him to say. But the machine can't do that. The machine can't know you're doing that because the machine's not William Faulkner.
So there are. It sounds to me that there are two things going on here. First of all, is the resource question, right? It just might not
There is
have
a
the
technical
resource.
aspect that a lot of people when they think about AI are not thinking about, which is there's an old canard amongst tech people. There is no such thing as the cloud. There is only someone else's computer.
Okay.
Right? So there are computers running. So ChatGPT, all this generative AI, is just a computer sitting somewhere else.
Right.
And that computer has finite resources. And that computer is hooked to other computers that have finite resources. And there are computer programs and things that are constantly having to make decisions about where to shift the resources in what direction for these efficiencies of resources. And so there's that limitation, especially on the free version of this, which is what you're using.
Yeah, I wonder what the paid version would do. That'd be interesting.
It would be interesting. It is a stronger model. So the free version is GPT 3.5. The stronger model is GPT-4. The paid version is GPT-4, right? But even then, you're limited to a certain number of queries. Even with the paid version, you have a limited number of queries that you can make within a certain amount of time to, again, maximize the efficiencies of these resources because it is so massively compute intensive. And there's also the limitations of what has been fed into the machine.
Right.
And if those people setting the machine up, if, they don't think anybody's going to, if you want to know about Faulkner, we've just fed the Wikipedia page about Faulkner in here.
Yeah.
Right? That's all it has.
Right.
I mean, I don't know. It might have more than that. It might, have been fed, Cleonth Brooks's, in the Yakima country, right? Who knows what else has been fed, but it might not have. All it can take, and the machine, at least right now, can't actually interpret, this.
Hey, do we have a way of finding out what it has been fed? Could I ask that?
Well, no, you can't.
Okay.
You can't.
If
you ask it, it can't tell you.
Huh.
It can. I've done this in my classes before. I've said where I've asked it to, write a sort of sample essay. Because what I do in my classes is I know students were going to use this thing to cheat. Students had used it to cheat, so I just said I'm going to force you to use it so you can't cheat.
Very clever.
So we use it in class. We force the machine. We all together come up with an essay. We make the machine write it. And then I require my students to take that and to assess all the weaknesses in it, and then from that rebuild an entire new essay, right? That has to show that it's not just a mere revision of this thing, right? Of what the machine made. So I've asked the machine before, give me citations. And it says I cannot at this current moment in time give you citations. I said, okay, well, give me some sources. And it said, well, I cannot give you the sources I used. However, these are some useful sources for this material.
Why can't it do that? Why can't it tell you the sources it used?
That I don't know.
That to me is
a
bit disconcerting.
That I don't know.
Because, you need to be able to peel it, but it has to be transparent in order for you to know if it's reliable, right?
Well, this is part of the larger thing about AI that we're trying to struggle with, right? If you ask ChatGPT to say, tell me your sources on this, it will say, I'm unable to tell you my sources. I'm unable to give you citations at this moment. But if you ask, okay, so what are some good resources to looking at this, it will then give you those things. This maybe implies that it is using those things; yes. Those resources have been fed into it. That's part of the corpus of information that it has access to. Right. Because my understanding is, at least the version of ChatGPT that you're using, my understanding is, and I might be wrong about this, that version of ChatGPT does not have access to the open internet. Okay. Now, you do have things like Microsoft, which is now, if not the owner, the majority stakeholder in OpenAI, has integrated OpenAI, ChatGPT, an OpenAI-powered AI chatbot into its Bing search engine. And that basically is just another way of searching the internet. Yeah. That is like, and it's really interesting how that works. But you do that, it does give you its sources, and it does kind of give you footnotes about things, because that just becomes a sort of a different way of doing a internet search. So
right? Scraping the internet, and
it goes and does the internet search, and then it puts it together for you in a sort of descriptive way. So it'd be interesting if you use another form of AI, what it would do.
Yeah, so we might do that in the future. So I'm hearing resources as an issue. And the actual phrasing of the question, you have to be very careful.
Yes.
If I'd have put in family, it would have given us something more about family.
It probably would have talked about the old colonel and the young colonel.
Yeah, okay.
And if it didn't talk about them, it would be shocking, because those two men, I can't remember their actual names, but there's the old colonel and the young colonel. Okay. It's his great-grandfather and his great-grandfather, who's a legendary figure in Mississippi history and politics. Fought in the Mexican-American War, fought in the what he would have referred to as the late unpleasantness, right? And raised basically cavalry and essentially commando units in each. Became an incredibly successful businessman during Reconstruction. Wrote a novel that was a bestseller and remained a bestseller throughout much of the Deep South, well into the 20th century. And then, so he was this great figure. And then you had the young colonel, who was his son, a sort of lesser version of that. And then you had Faulkner's father, Murray Faulkner, who was essentially a failure, just supported by his father's wealth. His fathers essentially wrote him out of his father and grandfather essentially wrote him out of the wheel because he was just a failure.
Good Lord. And
Faulkner's living under all of this. You also have to understand that Faulkner, another sort of thing about this is Faulkner changes the spelling of his name. His name is, the spelling of his name at birth is Falkner. That's Faulkner. He goes back and, interestingly, adds the U to his name as an adult. And in some ways, this is something else this machine is not talking about here. Because why would the machine know this? Because you haven't asked it to talk about this. Right. The machine is not talking about that name change and what that says, because that's about a vision of Faulkner that goes beyond the South. That's about Faulkner as this self-created mythology. Because in changing his name, he is connecting himself to something deeper than the South. He's connecting himself back to the older Norman spelling of the name. The Faulkners were an Anglo-Norman family. So he goes back to this older Norman spelling of the name, which had fallen out, over the course of the last, it's intervening 700-800 years. He goes back to the older Anglo-Norman spelling when he's trying to create a mythology of himself. And Faulkner is so self-created in his own sort of mythologies, his own mythos. There's all these just insane stories. He lied to everyone. He really wanted to fight in the Great War, but he was a very short man, 5'3", 5'4", something like that. It was a very small statured man. And the United States military wouldn't accept him. But of course, the royal military, His Majesty's military, would have accepted a short man because, as you know, that y'all were losing a whole lot of fellas, right? So he went to Canada when Canada was not an independent country. It was a dominion of the United Kingdom. He went up there and joined the RAF in Toronto. And, of course, 11/11/18 happened before he finished his training. But he stayed in Toronto for a while anyway. And he came back, and a bunch of men came back with shell shock and all these things. And Faulkner, we'd call it now stolen valor, right? He basically buys a lot of medals off a lot of veterans who were shell shocked and all these things. and puts him on his chest with his uniform and goes back and lies to everyone for a while.
Really?
Pretending he did all these combat missions and he knew how to fly a plane. This is the kind of guy this guy was.
He's also someone.
Yeah. I mean, in the 1950s, he's in Charlottesville as the writer in residence at Mr. Jefferson's University. Not ever call it UVA to any of those people. They'll get angry with you.
That's right.
And he put on his top hat and his red jacket and his what do you call the riding breeches with the leather patches, the jodhpurs or whatever?
Jodhpurs,
yeah, jodhpurs. Yeah. And went out and rode to the hounds and went fox hunting, in the Shenandoah Valley, as if he's some English lord, right?
Of course he did.
This is how the guy is.
Right.
This is who the guy is.
Yeah.
He's always inventing himself. His greatest creation is William Cuthbert Faulkner.
Yeah.
But he's doing that under the aegis of, and under the influence of, and under the legends, the mythos of his family, and via his family, Mississippi, and via Mississippi, the South. He's a Southern writer, but before that, he is a Mississippi writer. And before that, he is a North Mississippi writer. He ain't writing about down around Biloxi. He's writing about Yoknapatawpha County, which is his fictional reimagining of Lafayette County. Right. That's what he's writing about.
So it seems to me, Matt, I mean, for us to get ChatGPT AI to give this kind of answer with this level of detail, this level of nuance and knowledge, would require a question that would be so long and so detailed that you might as well do the research yourself.
Correct. And this is actually getting to something really important, Mark. This is getting to something really important about understanding what generative AI and is not. Mm-hmm. People hear about it on the news. People post stuff on Facebook or Instagram or whatever about this. You have all these. There was a commercial a year or so ago, 9 months ago, about some internet ISPs, like super high speed internet, Xfinity or Spectrum or something. And in there were a group of middle school age boys in the commercial over there at the coffee machine. They were all going to work with their parents there at the ISP, and they were all saying, "Oh yeah, mom and dad are my mom and your dad are making the making this internet so much faster, so AI can do our homework for us even more quickly." And that's what people think about generative AI. They think it's this thing to do our homework.
Right.
If that's what we make it into, we're going to be a race of idiots because it cannot do nuance. What it does and does very well is create basic templates of broadly factual information that can be used as jumping off points for larger things. If you are a new middle school teacher and you have no idea how to write a lesson plan for your 8th grade science class, and you ask ChatGPT, you ask generative AI, hey, write me a lesson plan to teach 8th graders about electron shells. It can give you a basic thing like that. Then you come and you fill in the details. Right. If you're in business and you say, I have to do a PowerPoint presentation delivering, about the sales results, and here's what our sales results were last year. They were not as good as I thought they would be. I have no skill in rhetoric. I'm very, untrained with this. I'm very unsure of myself. The machine can maybe give you a basic template that then you can go and fill in. And if we think about the machine as this thing that can kind of be our little assistant, they can give us these basic templates of things, kind of like what a wealthy CEO might go to a secretary or a personal assistant to do. Then we can say, okay, this thing's a useful tool. Yeah. But the way it's been talked about the last 18 months or so, 2 years, is this thing that's going to replace us all. And that's stupid. It's not. There are some jobs that, unfortunately might kind of get, destroyed by this. Things like, personal assistant jobs, things like paralegals, that kind of stuff, the machine may very well replace. But anything where you need to be in a position where you're doing nuanced, sophisticated information, again, it's your point. To get the machine to give what you want to do, you have to ask questions that are so specific that one, especially these free versions of AI, at some point it's just going to say you can't do that because there's a character limit. You're limited to 3,000, 4,000 characters, what you can ask. So you're going to run out of that, or it's going to say this is too big, it's requiring too many compute reseurces, and just refuse to give you an answer. It will do that sometimes.
Interesting.
It will, especially at peak usage times.
Yeah, sure.
And so you might as well just go do all the daggone research yourself.
That's right.
So, I mean, think that's the way we got to think about this.
That's actually very helpful.
As a tool, not as this sort of magical thing that's going to replace us all.
Very helpful, right? Very helpful. Let's bring him back to Faulkner here.
Yes.
Can we talk about this bit where ChatGPT says the South isn't just a setting, it's a way of life, the manners, the language, the pace, the rhythm of my existence. What do you think about that?
Okay, the rhythm. The rhythm. Here's the rhythm. Okay, so this whole idea of the South has a slower pace of life, there are things about that are correct and true. But if you look at Faulkner's South, you look at especially his mature fiction, well, not his mature fiction, his best fiction, which he's putting out between The Sound and the Fury, which is published in 27, if I remember right. It's 27 or 29. It's one of those. I can't remember. And then the end of World War II with Go Down Moses. He has about a 17, 18-year period where he publishes about a dozen novels that are absolute magnificent works of staggering genius. And that fiction, the pacing there is not slow. It is not laconic. It is not leisurely by any means. And so I want to read something. This is from I teach this story every semester in my literature class. This is Barn Burning. This is one of his most canonical stories here. This story is from that era, right? This is from the 1930s. And I just kind of showed this pace. And if the listeners have never read Faulkner, this story is a really great place to begin. I'm going to spoil a couple things, though.
Okay.
So what happens here in this story is you have a man named Abner Snopes who's a serial arsonist. He's a poor white sharecropper who, in his impotent rage against essentially being looked down in the society around him, feeling as if he's this white man and in many ways he's no better than the black men around him. He has this rage about him is really the only way to say it. And the way he exercises this is he's a serial arsonist against the barns of the landowners for whom he is sharecropping. He is always kind of able to weasel his way out of things and not find himself at the end of a hangman's noose, right? But there's one moment here where the son, and the story is told not through the narration of, but through the perspective of his 9, 10, 11-year-old son, Sardi Snopes. And Sardi is so upset and angry that his father's going to go burn another place down that is owned by a guy named Major Despain. And Sardi, in his 10-year-old naivete, thinks if he runs and tells Major Despain that his daddy's going to go burn the barn, that Major Despain will capture his father, stop his father, and then basically make his father not be naughty anymore. This is a 10-year-old boy's naivete. Right. And this is the sort of key moment here. So Sardi has just told Major Despain, hey, Daddy's going to go, Pap, as he calls him, is going to go burn your barn down. And this is the pacing. This is the pacing here. Yep. Behind him, the white man was shouting, "My horse, fetch my horse." And he thought for an instant of cutting across the park and climbing the fence into the road, but he did not know the park nor how high the vine-masked fence might be, and he dared not risk it. So he ran on down the drive, blood and breath roaring. Presently, he was in the road again, though he could not see it. He could not hear either. The galloping mare was almost upon him before he heard her, and then he held his course, as if the very urgency of his wild grief and need must in a moment more find him wings, waiting until the ultimate instant to hurl himself aside and into the weed-choked roadside ditch as the horse thundered past and on, for an instant in a furious silhouette against the stars, the tranquil early summer night sky, which, even before the shape of the horse and rider vanished, stained abruptly and violently upward, a long swirling roar, incredible and soundless, blotting the stars, and he springing up and into the road again, running again, knowing it was too late yet, still running even after he heard the shot, and an instant later 2 shots, pausing now without knowing he had ceased to run, crying, "Pap! Pap!" running again before he knew he had begun to run, stumbling, tripping over something and scrabbling up again without ceasing to run, looking backward over his shoulder at the glare as he got up, running on among the invisible trees, panting, sobbing, "Father, Father."
What I hear there is
there was
not
only
the
one
slow, deliberate pace of the South, right?
No, there's manic here.
Right, it is manic.
There's chaos. There is a contentiousness here. Yeah, there's all these tensions of, what does it say, the complexities of race, class, and family dynamics. Those are certainly at play in this story. Sure. This story is exhibit one for race, class, and family dynamics in Faulkner. But this is not a laconic, leisurely pacing. This is not Moonlight and Magnolias. This is not, Thomas Nelson Page, right? This is not anything like that. This is a South that is deeply full of chaos and contradiction, and full of this sense of what do we do? How do we untangle ourselves from this? This makes it seem as if Faulkner looked at the South and said, "Look at this wonderful, complex place, but I get to contemplate the deeper realities." Right. Sardi Snopes has no time to contemplate the deeper realities. Right. Sardi Snopes is in that moment contemplating these things, but he's contemplating these things as he hears and it's so much going on you don't even catch. He hears two shots. And he's trying to make sense of those two shots, because what has just happened, his father's just been killed because of him.
Because of him, right.
And in all that, there's only one full stop.
Is that right?
There's one full stop in all that.
Incredible, yeah.
The rest was commas and colons. And then at the very end, there's two exclamation marks. Father, Father. But there's only one full stop.
All right, Matt, I know that we could talk for hours about this, but what's your takeaway from this conversation?
One, I really think that a lot of people are terrified of AI. I think there are certain industries that you should be terrified, because it is going to disrupt and ruin those things. But I think people that, especially in the educational space and universities, higher education, that are looking at it as this destruction of the essay, those kind of things, you sound a bit like Socrates saying writing is going to be the end of everything. And this is not me trying to, this is not me trying to say, oh, you're just so backwards or whatever, right? This is something I think we need to learn how to use this tool.
Yeah.
Because it can be used as a tool, because I get more and more evidence every day that the things we're afraid of it taking away from us, it is really, really bad at doing.
Yeah.
And learning that and becoming comfortable with that, I think will actually sort of change how this gets used in education, both K-12 and higher ed, how it gets used in employee technical training, those kind of stuff. Yeah. The other thing I'd say is, if anyone tells you Faulkner is just a Southern writer, Faulkner is not a Southern writer. He's in some ways the Southern writer, but he's not a writer only for the South. Faulkner is a writer of the South the way Dostoevsky is a writer of Russia, the way Shakespeare is a writer of England. They are of these places, but they are not for these places. And I think the machine makes it seem as if Faulkner's just going to give you the contemplation of the leisurely sort of aspects of the South and race and class in the South and all that. Faulkner's going to force you to ask what it means to be human, the way the great writers, the way, Jane Austen does.
You want to know my takeaway from all this?
That you should read Faulkner again, because I know you hated Absalom when you read it 20-odd years ago.
Well, that's one of the takeaways. But my bigger takeaway is, if you want to know about Faulkner, don't go to ChatGPT. Take Matt Simmons' class.
Yeah. Please do that.
Matt, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Mark.